This is part 4 of my guide to the Soulware quest. I highly recommend to keep up the order of the bosses or else the difficulty of the quest will be different. In the previous part, I explained the ebb and flow. This time I will cover the Furious Crater and Goshnar's Cruelty. This boss will be the second hardest after Goshnar's Malice from the Brachydemons, and it's mostly because of the taints, which by now you will have 3 of them. The first one makes the Cloak of Terrors during the access teleport to the furthest target. The second one will give you a chance to summon new cloaks from attacks, and the third one gives you a 15% damage taken increase from all the monsters. For this access it won't be a massive problem except when clearing the second floor. But let's break down what you need to do for the access first. Furious Crater has 4 different floors, but in order to be able to go down to the next floor, you need to get charges on the current one. These charges are dropped in the floor by the monsters when they receive any damage, for which the strategy is to run them over fire or poison bombs. Ideally, you want to do this with phantoms or courage leashes, and it's because you want to avoid doing this with the Cloak of Terrors, since one of their special mechanics is that when they get hit, they leave behind drops of blood that do energy damage when walking over them, based off the player max HP, and they can stack on top of each other so the damage can get pretty high. But also, the other mechanic from this spawn is the chain damage. This used to be the original spawn with chain attacks from all monsters, but eventually with a balance update they added a chain attack to all phantoms of Soulware. But regardless, Crater remains with the worst AoE damage due to the cloaks and leeches having a chain attack as well. This is not as noticeable at a distance because there needs to be a player within 2 to 3 squares from each other for it to bounce out. But since there will be cloaks teleporting to the back, then the damage can stack up pretty quick. Now with that said, back to the access. For the first floor, it's pretty simple, as you can lure phantoms from the sides and fireball the area by the entrance, and then get your charges this way. In the case you lure a cloak, then just kill it while trying to avoid walking it over the bones too much. For this floor, you will need 40 charges, which you can see in the quest log, or when you have them all, it won't let you pick up anymore. 4 people can do the access this way, and the last one can do it while clearing the way to the second floor. Some people like to run to the teleport, but I do not recommend doing that, because the start to the second floor is the hardest and most important part of the access. When going down as the EK, you want to move just a few squares to the southeast, and then the shooters want to be spread throughout the west wall, Paladin furthest north, and whoever the highest mage is to the furthest south. For this part, even if you have charms, I highly recommend to stick into SDs. This will reduce the odds of summoning, which will still happen, but it will help to clear down the pool faster. Make sure to be switching targets to the ones that are on the mage or paladin. Usually during this part, as the EK, I'm just holding the extra monsters and going full defensive, but be careful as at least one druid should be healing the paladin or even themselves. This part, even though it will hopefully be less than 8 monsters, due to the teleports, summoning, and the constant chaining, the damage can get pretty high. But focusing on one at a time, especially since they are weaker to SDs, is what works the best. Whenever somebody gets more than 2 monsters, they should try to bring them to the EK, but always be aware that the moment somebody gets close to the EK is when the chain hits harder. After clearing this first pool, I like to head southeast since there will be a bit more room to place bombs and walk over the monsters, for which you should try to keep the phantoms alive. They are the easiest to walk around for charges due to the range etc. Have the shooters close to the south wall and 1 person at a time gets the charges. Be aware that some clocks will respawn and teleport. Just focus them down with SDs, and if you really need to, bring it to the EK. And as per usual, just stand still whenever a cloak is around to avoid their blood on the ground. After everyone gets 55 charges, then go to the previous pool, as that is where the teleport is for the next floor. The exit or TP back to the first floor is located on the opposite side to the east. Going down to the third floor tends to be easy, as usually it's 2 to 4 monsters. Once again, SD down the cloaks and leeches, and then find 2 to 3 phantoms nearby to get the charges. For the next floor, which is where the boss lever is located, you will need 70 charges. Also for this floor, the exit is located on the west side, and this will take you next to the TP to go back to the safe area. Once you get the charges, take the smoke portal to go down, and then head north to the boss lever. This boss will do physical, death and life drain to the EK, and physical, death and a bit of fire to the shooters. Not worth switching equipments since the fire will be the lowest. As for the EK, even though the life drain is going to be high, it's not recommended to gear up for it. In fact, for this one, similar to the first boss, you will have to hold on to stone skin amulets a lot, But first, let's break down the mechanics. The main one and priority is to reduce Cruelty's hunger by feeding souls. There will be a many faces called Poor Soul that always respawn on the southwest, and somebody always needs to be near the respawn. For this, I recommend the Paladin, but this time it's necessary to have a backup, for which it's better to have the MS be the second person. What the main person does, in this case the Paladin, is to lure the Poor Soul to the north where there will be a greedy eye by the wall. This eye acts like a monster that can target players, so the person bringing the monster must avoid being on these two squares next to it, because if you stand there, then the eye will be targeting you and facing to the sides. Sometimes it might be even targeting somebody to the east, so pay attention to where the eye is looking, since you want to always face forward as he casts a beam that kills the Poor Soul. When he does this, the Poor Soul gets turned into a skull, which needs to be fed to a mouth on the south side. This is the biggest priority for this fight, since by doing this, you delay the boss getting stronger and more resistance, which will happen regardless, but this slows it down massively, and failing to do it makes the boss stronger faster. Usually, if you're doing good, the boss should be near half HP by the 5 to 6 minute mark, and 12 minutes in, he should be somewhere in the 10%. Any higher than that means you might have missed some skulls, and it will be harder to kill it, even though the time limit is 20 minutes. Since he gets more resistant as time goes, he will be taking such little damage towards the end that he starts to out-heal most of the damage, so it's important to pay attention to the time and his HP, as well as the damage you're doing to it, since you will be able to tell if you can do it or if you should just leave the room. Now back to the mechanic. The reason that you have a backup to the Paladin is that sometimes it might take too long for the eye to kill the soul, and he might not be in position to take the next soul as it spawns. But also, since the RP doing the mechanic will always be the furthest away, the greens will be teleporting to him the most, and also the green from the rune itself spawns near the eye. So a lot of times there will be 2 or more greens on the Paladin. Because of that, the main job of the second person, in this case the MS, is to block off some of the greens away from the Paladin and then bring it to the EK, while also being on standby in case he needs to do the mechanic of taking the soul to the eye. But additionally, sometimes the mouth won't take the skull from the RP. When this happens, he needs to call that out and leave the skull there, and the MS comes to feed it instead. There seems to be a cooldown for the person feeding it, or a cooldown in general for how many skulls he can eat. Regardless, the RP and MS doing the mechanic are enough to deal with it by alternating those times. With that aside, there is another monster that spawns in the room that looks like a Bonnie Say Devil. This monster is the main source of the life drain damage. I prefer to be the one tanking it, which adds a bit more difficulty to the fight, since the damage can be high, but also because you need to move towards each respawn every time. This monster ignores the sudden rest, and the only way to get this aggro is to block this path, so by moving toward it respawns as the EK, you make sure to get the aggro right away. There is another strategy, which is to have the Paladin tank the main mount the entire fight, and just stand still by the southeast avoiding its spin, which is the heavy damage. This helps the EK a lot and also provides a lot more damage to the boss from the Paladin. However, it comes at the cost of having a druid or MS doing the mechanic instead, and the main person doing it will struggle a lot with her mana. So when we did it that way, the main and backup will need to alternate more often in order to heal up their mana. Besides that, it also reduces the AoE damage by removing a mage from the main damage spots, and that is just as important as the mechanic, since killing down the Grims is a must, because every time you get 5 Grims in the room, everyone will suffer from it, and that will happen no matter what. So it's important for the mages to have the mana to stay alive on those moments, so that is why I prefer having the RP being the main person doing the mechanic. And when doing it this way, as the EK, I like to move the boss a bit in order to match the RP's movement in the room, since when he is by the eye or the mouth, he won't be in range to attack, so getting the boss closer to him helps with the damage. Of course, this is only doable when the room is under control. Whenever there is multiple Grims, then the EK needs to grab them quickly so that mages are able to focus them down with GFBs and waves. Also, as the EK, you need to avoid the waves from the boss, so be aware of that. But this applies to the mages as well. The majority of times the boss will be waving towards the sides. For this, the two druids need to be to the north and south of the Ike, and whenever they get a grim, then move to the opposite side and the Ike grabs the grims all the way. You can also go through him or get closer, since this time there is no fear mechanic to be careful with, but the damage can be high near the Ike, so play it off based on how your mana is doing. Lastly, there is two other mechanics in the room. One of them is that somebody at random gets turned into a fire elemental. When you get turned, then after 8 seconds you will cast a fire AoE around you that will also hit you. This does around 2k damage, so whenever somebody gets turned, they should call it out and try to stay away from others. The other mechanic involves a physical AoE that covers the entire room. Before that happens, the boss in the room will warn you with these messages, and then after the 8 seconds, the AoE will hit. Whenever somebody notices that is going to happen, they should call it out so you pay attention to your stun skin charges and your mana. But this one is unavoidable and it often happens without anyone noticing. Overall, this fight consists of doing the soul mechanic every time and for the Ike to keep the greens on him so that the room can be under control. And the high difficulty of the fight comes in those moments when you get the 5 greens. Since everyone will be taking high damage, things tend to go bad. But the other thing that often goes wrong and is very important to avoid is to always have either the main or secondary person in charge of the mechanic be near the pulse to respawn. If it spawns and nobody's close, then it might go for the Ike, and when that happens, it can be hard to take it off him. To the point that as the Ike, you might be forced to go and get rid of the soul yourself, and that is just as bad, because it gets harder to AoE the monsters and control the room. And that is all you need to know for this boss. For the next part of the series and the next boss you should do, I will cover the Rotten Wasteland and Goshnar's Hatred. Please consider subscribing if you found the video helpful. Thank you for watching, and a special thanks to the supporters of the channel, Tuna Hero, Elber, and Torta Slasher.